In the grand theater of family, blood is supposed to be the unbreakable bond, the sacred tie that withstands all storms. But sometimes, the ink dried upon a last will and testament speaks a louder, more painful truth, a truth that money does not create, but merely reveals. It does not just divide an estate, it exposes the hidden fractures of the heart and lays bare the character of those left behind. In the polished mahogany boardroom of Abernathy and Crowe, the air was thick with the scent of old leather, generational wealth, and the suffocating silence of grief, or at least the performance of it. Elara Vance sat slightly apart from the others, a solitary figure in a simple black dress that seemed to absorb the little light filtering through the tall windows overlooking the city. Her husband, Leo, sat directly across the table, his grief looking more like thinly veiled impatience. His jaw was tight, his expensive suit feeling more like armor than attire, his eyes fixed on the elderly lawyer, as if trying to extract the words by force. Next to him, his sister, Sophia, exuded an aura of regal entitlement, occasionally dabbing a perfectly dry eye with a silk handkerchief, her expression one of weary condescension. They were the heirs apparent, the children of the Titan, Arthur Vance, and this meeting was but a final, tedious formality before they claimed their kingdom. Mr. Abernathy, a man who had served Arthur for 40 years, cleared his throat, the sound echoing unnaturally in the stillness. He adjusted his spectacles and began to read the document that would change everything. He spoke of Arthur's wishes for his funeral, his small bequests to loyal staff, and then he paused, looking over his glasses at Leo and Sophia. The air crackled. Leo leaned forward almost imperceptibly. Sophia's manicured hand stopped its gentle tapping. The lawyer's voice was steady, a calm river delivering a devastating flood. To my son, Leo Vance, I leave $100,000, with the hope that he might use it to purchase a mirror so he can one day see the man he has become. A sharp intake of breath came from Leo. Sophia shot a venomous glare, not at the lawyer, but at Elara. Mr. Abernathy continued, his voice unwavering. To my daughter, Sophia Vance, I also leave $100,000 and the family photograph albums, so she might remember a time when her love was not transactional. Sophia let out a strangled gasp, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. But the final blow was yet to come. Mr. Abernathy took a slow, deliberate breath. All the rest, residue, and remainder of my estate, including all shares in Vance Industries, all properties real and personal, all liquid assets and trust funds, I bequeath in its entirety to my beloved daughter-in-law, Elara Vance. The words fell into the silence, each one a hammer blow shattering the foundation of the Vance family. Elara felt the blood drain from her face. It wasn't joy she felt, or triumph. It was a cold, terrifying shock, the feeling of standing on a cliff's edge as the ground crumbled beneath her feet. She could feel the heat of two pairs of eyes burning into her, transforming from familial annoyance into pure, unadulterated hatred. This wasn't an inheritance, she realized with chilling certainty. It was a crown of thorns, a declaration of war left by a dead man, and she had just been named its sole combatant. Before she was the unwilling queen of a corporate empire, before her name was a curse whispered in the gilded halls of high society, Elara Vance was a librarian. Her world was one of quiet order, of the gentle rustle of turning pages and the comforting scent of aged paper. She found solace in stories, in the neatly catalogued lives of others, a stark contrast to the chaotic ambition that pulsed through the city just beyond her library's walls. It was in this sanctuary that she met Leo Vance, not as the heir to a fortune, but as a man with a charming smile and a captivating intensity in his eyes. He pursued her with a single-minded determination that she mistook for profound love, a whirlwind of thoughtful conversations and stolen moments that made her believe in the fairy tales she so often catalogued. She fell in love not with his last name, but with the promise of a future he painted, a future she believed they would build together. Marrying into the Vance family was like stepping into a different dimension. The Vance mansion was not a home. It was a museum of its own success, a sprawling estate of cold marble, imposing portraits, and rooms so vast and silent they seemed to swallow sound. Family dinners were not gatherings of warmth and affection, but board meetings disguised with silverware, where conversations revolved around stock prices, acquisitions, and the strategic marriages of other wealthy families. Alara, with her quiet nature and love for simple things, was an anomaly, a strange bird with plain feathers in an aviary of peacocks. Her mother-in-law, Beatrice, would offer backhanded compliments that were thinly veiled criticisms of Alara's background, saying things like, "It's so refreshing to have someone so uncomplicated in the family." Sophia, her sister-in-law, made no effort to hide her disdain, openly mocking Alara's choice of clothing, her taste in books, and her lack of interest in the vicious gossip that fueled their social circle. For a time, Leo was her shield, defending her with a laugh and a squeeze of her hand. But slowly, imperceptibly at first, the shield began to lower. He grew tired of the friction, urging her to just play the part and make more of an effort, his words chipping away at the foundation of the partnership she thought they had. It was in this gilded cage that she found an unlikely ally, Arthur Vance himself. The patriarch of the family, the architect of the empire, was a lion in winter. While the rest of the family was consumed by the present, by the endless hum of maintaining their status, Arthur had retreated into a world of reflection. He was a man adrift in his own monument, surrounded by people who bore his name, but no longer seemed to speak his language. Alara, seeking refuge from the suffocating judgment of Beatrice and Sophia and the growing distance from Leo, often found herself in the one room they all avoided, the grand library, Arthur's personal sanctuary. Their connection didn't blossom overnight. It began with small gestures of quiet companionship. She would bring him his afternoon tea without being asked. She noticed the books he was reading: history, philosophy, the biographies of great leaders, and would find articles or other books on the same subject, leaving them on the table for him. She never demanded conversation, she simply shared the silence with him. And Arthur, a man whose entire life had been a series of transactions and negotiations, was intrigued by this woman who wanted nothing from him. Their shared silence soon turned into conversation, and conversation turned into a ritual. Every afternoon, they would play chess. The ornate marble board became their battlefield and their confessional. Over the slow, deliberate movement of kings and pawns, Arthur began to talk. He didn't speak of balance sheets or profit margins. He spoke of his first business, a small machine shop he started with calloused hands and borrowed money. He told her of the betrayals he had endured, the friends he had lost to greed, the sacrifices he had made. In telling her his story, he was giving her the true history of the Vance fortune, a history written in sweat and risk, not just inherited privilege. He saw that she listened, truly listened, with an empathy and understanding his own children lacked. They saw the empire as their birthright. She saw it as his life's work. As Arthur's health began to fail, the chasm between him and his children widened into a canyon. Leo and Sophia's visits became shorter, more perfunctory. They would stand awkwardly in his room, checking their phones, talking loudly about their social plans, their concern feeling like a performance for an audience of one. They hired the best nurses, but they never offered the one thing he craved: their time. It was Alara who filled that void. She was the one who read the newspaper to him when his eyesight grew dim. She was the one who would sit by his bedside, not speaking, but simply being present, a calming anchor in the stormy waters of his illness. She would often find him staring out the window after his children had swept in and out in a gust of expensive perfume and hollow promises. One afternoon, after Leo had spent his 10-minute visit complaining about a deal that had fallen through, Arthur turned to Alara, his voice a low rumble. "He comes to check on his inheritance," he said, without a trace of self-pity, only a profound, weary clarity. Not on his father. In those final years, Alara became his confidant, his companion, and in a way, the child he had always wished for. He saw in her the qualities he had once valued above all else: integrity, loyalty, and a strength that didn't need to announce itself. During one of their last chess games, she executed a move so unexpectedly brilliant that it left his king cornered. He stared at the board for a full minute before a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. "You see the whole board, Alara," he'd said, his voice raspy but full of admiration. "Not just the piece in front of you, They only see the crown. They forget that the game is won by the pawn that makes it to the other side. In that moment, Alara thought it was a simple compliment about her game. She didn't realize it was an anointment. He wasn't just playing chess with her. He was showing her the board of her own future, positioning her, his most trusted piece, for the final, decisive move he knew he would never live to make himself. Their bond was forged in the quiet spaces the rest of the family had abandoned, a silent testament to the fact that the truest family is not always the one you are born into, but the one that finds you in the dark. To the outside world, the marriage of Leo and Alara Vance was a portrait of modern success. He was the handsome, charismatic heir, steering his father's company into the future. She was his elegant, reserved wife, a picture of quiet support and refined grace. They were a power couple, their image carefully curated for magazine spreads and society pages, a testament to the enduring legacy of the Vance dynasty. But a portrait, no matter how beautifully framed, is merely a single, frozen moment, designed to hide the imperfections that lie just beyond its edges. Behind the closed doors of their sprawling mansion, the gilded frame was cracking, revealing the cold, empty canvas of a relationship in its final, agonizing decay. The decline was a slow erosion, a death by 1,000 small cuts. It began with Leo's phone, a sleek black rectangle that became a barrier between them. It lay face down on the nightstand, a silent black stone guarding its secrets. It would vibrate late at night, casting a fleeting, ghostly light on the ceiling, and he would dismiss it with a mumbled, "Just a late email from the Tokyo office." He started taking calls in his study, the heavy oak doors closing with a soft, definitive click, his voice dropping to an indecipherable murmur. The excuses for his absence began to pile up like unread newspapers. There were late-night strategy sessions that stretched until 3 in the morning, sudden out-of-town business trips that he only mentioned hours before leaving, and an endless stream of networking dinners with clients she never met. He would return home in the early hours of the morning, the faint, cloying scent of a strange floral perfume clinging to the fibers of his expensive coat, a scent that was nothing like the subtle, woody fragrance Alara wore. When she tried to bridge the growing chasm between them, to find the man she had married within the cold, distant stranger he had become, she was met with a wall of dismissive irritation. Her questions were met with accusations. "Why are you so insecure all of a sudden?" he would ask, his voice laced with annoyance as he loosened his tie. "You know the pressure I'm under. The least you could do is be a supportive partner, not a detective." He was an expert at twisting her concern into a character flaw, making her feel that her loneliness was her own failing. Her quiet life, once a source of comfort, was now reframed as a weakness. "Maybe you should get a hobby, Alara," he once suggested, not unkindly, but with a breathtaking lack of awareness. "Go to a charity luncheon or something. You have too much time on your hands to sit around and imagine problems." Her isolation was compounded by the subtle, relentless psychological warfare waged by his family. His mother, Beatrice, was a master of the passive-aggressive slight. She would praise Leo effusively at family dinners for his tireless work ethic, casting a pointed, pitying glance at Alara, as if his long absences were a noble sacrifice he was making for Alara's opulent lifestyle. Beatrice would casually mention conversations she'd had with Leo, from which Alara was clearly excluded, reinforcing her status as an outsider. Sophia's cruelty was more direct, a series of precisely aimed darts intended to wound. She would comment on Alara's quaint background in front of their friends, or critique her opinions on art and politics with a dismissive wave of her hand, always concluding with a condescending, "But of course, you wouldn't have studied that, would you?" They were a united front, a polished wall of privilege and disdain, and against them, Alara's quiet pleas for connection stood no chance. They made it clear that in the Vance family, any fault in the golden son must surely originate with his common wife. The vague, gnawing suspicion that had become her constant companion finally coalesced into undeniable, soul-crushing certainty on a Tuesday afternoon. It was a day of mundane domesticity, a day like any other, which made the discovery all the more brutal. Alara was sorting through the laundry from Leo's latest business trip to Chicago, As she picked up one of his white dress shirts from the hamper, the scent hit her first, that same cloying floral perfume, now so strong it was, as if the woman had been standing right next to her. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs. Her hands, moving with a will of their own, smoothed the collar flat against the ironing board. And then she saw it. Caught in the threads near the collar was a single strand of hair. It was long, fine, and platinum blonde. Ilara's hair was a deep, dark brown. The world seemed to stop. The gentle hum of the washing machine faded away. The sunlight streaming through the window felt cold. It was a scene from a bad movie, a cliché so old it was laughable, yet its power to destroy was absolute. In that instant, every lie, every late night, every secret phone call, every condescending remark from his family snapped into a sickeningly clear picture. She was not paranoid. She was not insecure. She was a fool. She sank onto the small stool in the laundry room, the shirt clutched in her hand like a murder weapon, and the silence of the massive house pressed in on her. She thought about screaming, about throwing the shirt in his face the moment he walked through the door. But who would believe her? Leo would construct a plausible lie, a story about a colleague who leaned in too close at a meeting. Beatrice and Sophia would call her hysterical, a jealous wife, trying to tarnish their perfect son and brother. She had no allies in this house. An open confrontation would be her word against theirs, and she knew with a crushing certainty that she would lose. So she said nothing. She carefully plucked the blonde hair from the collar, letting it fall to the floor, an insignificant speck carrying the weight of a shattered marriage. She finished the laundry. She made dinner. She greeted Leo with a quiet hello when he came home late again that evening. But something inside her had changed. The desperate, wounded love had been cauterized, replaced by a cold, watchful clarity. Her pain did not disappear, but it was packed away, compressed under the weight of his betrayal into something harder, something more durable. Her silence was no longer a sign of submission. It was a shield. Her quiet observation was no longer passive. It was active. She was a prisoner who had finally seen the bars of her gilded cage for what they were. And while she did not yet know the way out, for the first time, she began to study the lock. The moment the heavy oak door clicked shut behind Mr. Abernathy, the fragile veneer of civility shattered into 1,000 pieces. The air in the room, already thick with tension, became instantly toxic, charged with the electric hum of pure, unadulterated rage. For a long, suffocating moment, there was only the sound of breathing Leo's, sharp and ragged, and Sophia's, a low hiss that seemed to emanate from her very core. Ilara remained perfectly still, her hands clasped in her lap, feeling like a lone chess piece left on the board after a devastating checkmate. She was the victor, yet she had never felt more like a target. Sophia was the first to move, her body coiling and striking like a viper. She shot up from her chair, the legs scraping violently against the polished floor, and stalked around the table until she was looming over Ilara. Her face, usually a carefully composed mask of bored elegance, was twisted into a grotesque snarl of disbelief and hatred. "You," she spat, the word dripping with venom. "You worthless little snake. How dare you?" Ilara said nothing, her gaze remaining fixed on a point on the far wall. This silent defiance only fueled Sophia's fury. "All those years," she continued, her voice rising to a shrill crescendo, "all that time you spent playing the quiet, dutiful little mouse, fetching his tea, reading his books. This was it, wasn't it? This was your long game. You manipulated a sick, dying old man and poisoned him against his own children." Her accusations hung in the air, sharp and glittering as broken glass. When Ilara still did not respond, Sophia's rage boiled over. She lunged forward and grabbed Ilara's arm, her long, manicured nails digging into her flesh like talons. "Look at me when I'm talking to you, you gold-digging tramp." Ilara flinched at the sudden pain, a small gasp escaping her lips. It was the first sound she had made, and it seemed to satisfy Sophia on a primal level. That was when Leo intervened, but it was not to defend his wife. He strode over and placed a hand on Sophia's shoulder, not gently, but with a proprietary firmness. "That's enough, Sophia," he said, his voice a low growl. It was not a plea for civility. It was a command from a fellow predator to let him take his turn. He pulled his sister back and then fixed his gaze on Ilara, and in his eyes she saw the death of every memory, every promise, every tender moment they had ever shared. The man she had loved was gone, replaced by this cold, avaricious stranger. His initial attack mirrored his sister's, and she's right, you know, he began, his voice dangerously calm. I didn't want to believe it. I defended you. I told them you were different. And all this time, you were playing me, playing all of us. What a fool I've been. He let out a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. But then, his strategy shifted. He was a businessman, a negotiator. Raw emotion was a tool, but manipulation was his art form. He knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. His touch was cold. Ilara, listen to me, he said, his voice dropping into an intimate conspiratorial tone that made her skin crawl. My father, he wasn't himself at the end. You saw it. He was paranoid, confused. This document, he gestured dismissively at the will on the table. This is not his legacy. It's his illness. It's a cruel joke on all of us, especially you. He has put you in an impossible position. He was trying to reframe the narrative, to cast himself not as a disinherited son, but as her partner, her savior, in a shared crisis. He was trying to build a bridge back to the us he had long since abandoned. We can fix this, he murmured, squeezing her hands. It's very simple. We go to our lawyers. We tell them that you agree the will was written under undue influence, that you renounce the inheritance. We have it voided, and then the estate reverts to Sophia and me, as it should. We will take care of you, of course. We'll set up a generous trust fund for you. No one outside this room ever has to know. We can put this whole ugly mess behind us and be a family again. His words were smooth, logical, and utterly monstrous. He was asking her to become his accomplice in erasing her own reality, invalidating his lies. As he spoke of their future, of being a family again, a single, vivid image flashed in Ilara's mind. The long, blonde hair on the collar of his shirt. That single strand of hair was her anchor to the truth. It was the lighthouse beam that cut through the fog of his deception, reminding her that the family he was promising was a fantasy he had already burned to the ground. That memory gave her strength. The shock that had frozen her began to thaw, replaced by an ice-cold clarity. She slowly pulled her hands from his grasp. She looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time since the will was read. She saw the desperation behind his feigned concern, the greed flickering in his eyes like a dying ember. She saw the weak, faithless man Arthur had seen. She didn't say a word. She simply stood up. Her silence was the most powerful weapon she possessed. It was a vacuum that their threats and manipulations could not fill. It unnerved them, infuriated them. As she turned and walked towards the door, Leo's carefully constructed composure finally snapped. Where do you think you're going? He snarled, his voice reverting to its raw, angry state. This isn't over. You don't get to just walk away. Ilara paused at the door, her hand on the cold brass handle, but she did not turn around. You have 24 hours, Ilara. Leo's voice was a chilling ultimatum from behind her. 24 hours to sign the papers and fix this mess. If you don't, I swear to you, I will make you wish you had died with my father. I will tear you apart in court and in the press. By the time I'm done with you, everyone in this city will believe you are the conniving whore my sister says you are. This is your only chance. The declaration of war had been made. Ilara opened the door and walked out into the marble hallway, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. She did not feel like a victor. She did not feel rich. She felt like a soldier, unarmed and alone, who had just survived the first bloody battle in a war she never wanted. But as she walked away from their hatred, she felt something else stirring deep within her, not fear, but a strange, terrifying, and unfamiliar resolve. They had meant to break her, but they had only shown her exactly who she was fighting. For 24 hours, Ilara existed in a state of suspended animation. She had left the lawyer's office and the smoldering ruins of her family and had checked into a sterile, anonymous suite at a downtown hotel under her maiden name, a name that felt both foreign and like a long-lost piece of herself. The city glittered below, a sprawling galaxy of indifferent lights, each one a life that was not hers, a life not currently imploding. Leo's final threat echoed in the unnerving silence of the room, a ticking clock counting down to her own destruction. She ordered no food, made no calls. She simply sat, replaying the venom in Sophia's eyes, the chilling manipulation in her husband's voice. She felt adrift on a black ocean, and she began to question Arthur's motives. Had he truly seen her as a worthy successor, or was she just a pawn in his final, cruel game against his children, a piece he had knowingly sacrificed to inflict the most damage? The immense fortune felt less like a life raft and more like a millstone, pulling her down into the depths. Just as the sun began to cast long, weary shadows across the city, her phone rang, the sound so sudden and jarring it made her jump. It was an unknown number. She hesitated, her mind racing with the paranoid thought that it was Leo, having already found her. But a deeper instinct told her to answer. The voice on the other end was calm, familiar, and steady as a rock. It was Mr. Abernathy. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his tone formal yet imbued with a certain warmth. "I apologize for the intrusion, but I am acting on a final set of instructions from Arthur. He left something more for you, something entrusted to my care, to be given to you only after the reading of the will. It is a matter of the utmost urgency. Could you meet me in 1 hour?" An hour later, Ilara found herself not at the grand, intimidating offices of Abernathy and Crow, but being led into a small, private study in a historic downtown building. The room was lined with old books, the air smelling of pipe, tobacco, and leather. It felt like a distillation of Arthur himself. Mr. Abernathy didn't waste time with pleasantries. He treated her not with the pity one might offer a victim, but with the solemn gravity one affords a general before a great battle. He gestured to a heavy, black metal safe deposit box on his desk. Arthur called this his insurance policy. The lawyer said simply, pushing the box and 2 small keys towards her. "He instructed me to ensure you received it in private, away from the family." Ilara's hands trembled slightly as she inserted the keys and turned them. The lock clicked open with a heavy, final sound. The contents were not what she expected. There were no stock certificates, no jewelry, no deeds. Instead, there was a thick manila envelope sealed with wax, her name written on the front in Arthur's familiar, strong handwriting. Beside it lay a small, worn, leather-bound journal and a single, ornate, old-fashioned key. She broke the seal on the envelope and pulled out a letter, several pages long. She began to read, and with every word, it was as if Arthur Vance was in the room, speaking directly to her soul. "My dearest Ilara," it began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and the war has begun. First, let me say I am sorry. I have thrown you into a viper's nest, and I do so with a heavy heart but a clear conscience. I know my children. I know their greed is a sickness of the soul. I am certain that by now, they have shown you their true faces, and I am sorry for the pain that revelation has caused you. But do not for a moment believe that your pain is an accident. It is, I am afraid, a necessary casualty in the pursuit of justice. I need you to know that you are not going mad. You have not been imagining things. I have known about Leo's infidelity for nearly 2 years. I had him followed. A man who breaks a vow to the woman who shares his bed cannot be trusted with the legacy a father builds over a lifetime. His betrayal of you was a symptom of a much deeper rottenness, a character flaw I could no longer ignore." Ilara had to stop, her breath catching in her throat. The validation was a painful, liberating balm. She wasn't the jealous, insecure wife they had painted her to be. Arthur had seen it. He had known. She read on. But his affair was the least of their betrayals. 6 months ago, Leo and Sophia conspired with a disreputable doctor to have me declared mentally incompetent. They drew up papers to seize control of my assets, to effectively bury me while I was still breathing. They failed only because my mind, thankfully, remained sharper than their ambition. They were not waiting for me to pass on. They were actively trying to usurp my life, to erase me. They did not want to inherit my kingdom. They wanted to stage a coup. The words hit Ilara with the force of a physical blow. This was a level of monstrousness she could never have imagined. It was not just greed. It was a profound, chilling lack of humanity. That is why I have done this, Alara. This fortune is not a gift, it is a weapon. It is the armor, the cavalry, and the artillery, all in one. I am not asking you to manage a portfolio, I am asking you to command an army. They see your kindness as weakness. They see your silence as submission. They have never known you. I have. I have seen the steel in you during our chess games. I have seen the resolve in your eyes when you cared for me, while my own children could not be bothered. They are about to learn, as all my old business rivals did, that underestimating a quiet opponent is the most fatal mistake of all. Do not mourn me. Avenge me. Protect the legacy we both cared for. Inside this box, you have the tools to begin. The journal contains my private notes and the preliminary evidence I gathered against them. The key opens a small, private office I maintained under a pseudonym. The address is on the last page of the journal. It is your fortress, your command center. No one knows it exists. Finally, I leave you with two names. The first is a private investigator, a man who finds truths that are buried deep. The second is a litigator, a woman who does not fight battles she cannot win. Trust them. They were loyal to me, and they will be loyal to you. You are not a pawn, Alara. You are the queen. Now, play the game. Yours, in eternal gratitude and faith, Arthur. By the time she finished the last line, the first light of dawn was breaking over the city. The fear that had paralyzed her was gone, burned away by a white-hot rage and a profound sense of purpose. The ticking clock of Leo's ultimatum no longer sounded like a death knell. It sounded like a starting pistol. The weight of the inheritance was no longer a burden. It was a mantle of power she now understood how to wear. She was not a victim in Arthur's game. She was his chosen champion. Mr. Abernathy, who had been waiting patiently, gave her a small, knowing smile. He had absolute faith in you, Mrs. Vance. Alara looked down at the key in her hand, at the journal that held the secrets, at the two names on the paper. For the first time, she started to have faith in herself. She stood up, her back straight, her resolve forged in the crucible of betrayal and grief. The quiet caregiver was gone, her memory, a ghost in this silent room. The strategist had been born. She looked at the lawyer, her voice clear and steady for the first time in days. Mr. Abernathy, she said, would you be so kind as to get me the number for that private investigator? His work begins immediately. The address on the last page of Arthur's journal led Alara not to a gleaming skyscraper, but to a discreet, older building in a quieter part of the city, a place of brick and stone that stood in silent defiance of the glass and steel towers that bore the Vance name. The ornate key slid into the lock of a nondescript door on the third floor, a door with no nameplate. The room it opened into was Arthur's true sanctum. It was the antithesis of the Vance mansion. It was a space built for purpose, not for show. One wall was covered in corkboard, another with bookshelves groaning under the weight of legal texts, market analyses, and corporate histories. A large, functional desk sat in the center, equipped with a powerful computer and multiple monitors, but no family photos. This was not a place for sentiment. This was a war room. And as Alara closed the door behind her, she felt the oppressive weight of the Vance legacy transform into something manageable, something she could command. Her first call was to the private investigator Arthur had recommended, Julian Croft. Following the journal's instructions, she used a prepaid burner phone Arthur had left in a desk drawer. They agreed to meet at a small, unassuming cafe, the kind of place you would never notice unless you were looking for it. Julian Croft was a man who matched his surroundings, quiet, unremarkable, with eyes that missed nothing. He was in his late 50s, with a calm demeanor that seemed to absorb and neutralize the chaos of the world around him. He showed no surprise at seeing her, no fawning recognition of the newest billionaire in the city. He simply nodded, gestured for her to sit, and waited. This was the first test of the new Alara, the strategist Arthur had christened her to be. The grieving, frightened woman from the hotel suite was gone, replaced by a client with a mission. She spoke in a low, steady voice, laying out the facts with methodical precision. She told him about the will, the threats, and the deep-seated betrayals Arthur had outlined in his letter. She didn't cry, She didn't waver. She was all business. Arthur's journal gives a starting point, she concluded, pushing a series of photocopied pages across the table. But I need more than his suspicions. I need irrefutable proof. My husband, Leo Vance. I know he is having an affair. I don't just want confirmation. I want a timeline. I want names, dates, and locations. I want to know where the money he's spending is coming from. I want to know everything he thinks is hidden, every secret he has. I want the entire, unvarnished truth, Mr. Croft, no matter how ugly it is. Julian listened without interruption, his gaze never leaving hers. When she finished, he gave a slow, deliberate nod. Arthur was a good man, and a shrewd judge of character, he said, his voice a gravelly baritone. He told me once that loyalty was the only currency that never lost its value. You have my loyalty, Mrs. Vance, and my complete discretion. He explained their protocol. All communication would be through encrypted messages on their new phones. All deliveries of evidence would be made through secure, indirect drops. He was not just an investigator, he was a spy master, and he was initiating her into the world of secrets and shadows. With the investigation in motion, Alara had to turn her attention to the immediate threat, Leo and his 24-hour ultimatum. It was time for her first performance. She waited until the evening, until she knew he would be restless and angry. His deadline almost expired. She took a deep breath, summoned the memory of her own past fear and confusion, and dialed his number. His voice when he answered was clipped and cold. Well? She let a tremor enter her voice, a convincing imitation of the woman she had been just a day before. Leo, she began, her voice cracking slightly. I'm so sorry. I've just been so overwhelmed. You were right. This is all too much for me to handle. She paused, letting a sob catch in her throat. I think you're right. We need to fix this. But I can't just sign things I don't understand. Can you please just give me a few more days? I need to talk to a lawyer, just to have them explain the paperwork. Please, Leo. I'm not trying to fight you. I'm just scared. The silence on the other end of the line was thick with his smug satisfaction. She could almost hear the triumphant smile spreading across his face. He had won. His weak, compliant wife had finally come to her senses. His tone shifted instantly from menacing to magnanimous, the condescending magnanimity of a victor. Of course, Ilara. Of course, he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. Take all the time you need, a week even. I know this has been a shock for you. I was just worried. We're going to get through this, you and I. Together. Ilara murmured a thank you and ended the call, her hands steady, her heart beating like a cold drum. He had swallowed the bait completely, blinded by his own arrogance. She had bought herself time, the most valuable commodity in any war. 3 days later, the first report from Julian arrived. It wasn't a report, but a plain brown envelope left for her at the front desk of the hotel by a courier. Back in the sterile safety of her suite, she opened it. Inside were a dozen high-resolution photographs and a single sheet of paper. The photographs were grainy, taken from a distance, but the images were brutally clear. There was Leo, laughing as he exited a high-end restaurant, his arm wrapped possessively around the waist of a stunningly beautiful woman with long platinum blonde hair. There were shots of them kissing, leaning against his car, before driving off together. There were pictures of them entering a sleek, modern apartment building. A building Alara had never seen before. The sheet of paper contained the details. The woman's name was Isabelle Laurent. She was an art gallery curator. The apartment was leased in her name, but paid for by a shell corporation that Julian was still tracing. The attached documents were copies of credit card statements from a corporate account Leo controlled, detailing thousands of dollars spent on restaurants Alara had never been to, designer clothing she would never wear, and a weekend trip to Napa he had claimed was a solo business retreat. Ilara laid the photographs out on the hotel room's coffee table. She looked at the woman's smiling face, at the easy intimacy between her and Leo, at the life he was living completely separate from hers. The pain was sharp and visceral. A knife twisting in a wound she thought had already turned to scar tissue. It was one thing to know of a betrayal. It was another to see its face. to have its name, to witness its casual, smiling cruelty in glossy 8x10. But as she stared at the images, the initial wave of pain receded, and something else took its place. It was a cold, clarifying rage. This was not just heartbreak anymore. This was evidence. Each photograph, each receipt, was a stone for the foundation of his ruin. That evening, in Arthur's secret office, she pinned the first photograph of Leo and Isabel to the center of the vast, empty corkboard. It looked small and lonely, the first piece of a puzzle of deceit. The quiet caregiver was truly gone now, buried under an avalanche of proof. In her place stood a woman with a purpose, a general staring at the first reconnaissance photos of the enemy, preparing for the long campaign ahead. The week that followed was a masterclass in duplicity. To Leo, Ilara was a woman adrift, her voice on their brief, stilted phone calls growing softer and more uncertain each day. She was, by all appearances, the grieving widow overwhelmed by the complexities of a vast fortune, inching ever closer to capitulating to his reasonable demands. She spoke of needing more time, of the confusing legal jargon, of her desire for all of this to just be over. Each lie was a carefully placed stone, building a path for him to walk confidently to his own doom. He grew more condescendingly patient with each passing day, so assured of his victory that he never thought to look over his shoulder. Meanwhile, in the quiet sanctuary of Arthur's secret office, a different Ilara existed. This Ilara was a commander, a hunter, her grief and heartbreak channeled into a laser-focused pursuit of the truth. The single photograph on the corkboard had multiplied. It was now the center of a rapidly expanding web of connections, a constellation of deceit mapped out with pins and colored string. Julian Croft was proving to be more than an investigator. He was an artist of secrets, and his medium was the hidden, ugly truth. The first thread he unraveled was the money. The Shell Corporation paying for Isabel's lavish apartment was just the tip of a very large, very dirty iceberg. Julian's forensic accountants, ghosts in the machine of global finance, followed the digital breadcrumbs through a labyrinth of offshore accounts and phantom consulting firms. They discovered that for the past 5 years, Leo had been systematically embezzling from Vance Industries. It was a scheme of breathtaking arrogance. He had created fake vendor accounts, submitted inflated invoices for non-existent services, and approved massive bonuses for ghost employees, all of which were funneled back into his personal slush fund. He wasn't just cheating on his wife. He was bleeding his own father's company dry, treating its coffers like his personal piggy bank. And he had not acted alone. The web quickly ensnared Sophia. While she was not involved in the operational details of the embezzlement, she was a silent and willing beneficiary. Julian uncovered regular, 7-figure transfers from Leo's illicit accounts into a private trust controlled by Sophia. She was his co-conspirator, her silence and complicity purchased with a steady stream of stolen cash. This was not just about funding an affair. This was a coordinated, parasitic assault on their own family legacy. They were termites, hollowing out the great house from the inside, all while living under its roof and claiming to be its protectors. Each new financial chart that Julian's team sent over, Ilara would pin to the board, the red strings connecting shell companies to her husband and sister-in-law looking like bleeding arteries. But as sickening as the financial betrayal was, it was nothing compared to the final, darkest secret Julian unearthed. It was the truth that Arthur had hinted at in his letter, a sin so profound it made infidelity and embezzlement seem like petty crimes. Following a lead from one of Arthur's journal entries, Julian began looking into the last few months of the patriarch's medical care. He found the name of a psychiatrist, a doctor, Alistair Finch, a man whose license was rumored to be hanging by a thread, a doctor known for providing whatever diagnosis his wealthy clients paid for. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying speed. Julian discovered a series of large, untraceable cash withdrawals made by Leo that coincided with a series of private, off-the-record meetings with Dr. Finch. The investigator's true genius lay in his ability to cultivate sources, to find the disgruntled nurse, the underpaid assistant, the person with a conscience who had seen something they shouldn't have. An anonymous source provided the final, damning piece of the puzzle. A digital copy of a medical competency report about Arthur Vance, commissioned by his children, drafted by Dr. Finch but never officially filed. Ilara read the document in the cold, artificial light of the office, the city lights outside blurred and distant. The report was a work of pure fiction, a tapestry of lies woven with cruel, clinical precision. It described Arthur, the sharpest mind she had ever known, as paranoid, delusional, and prone to fits of baseless rage. It twisted his moments of thoughtful silence into evidence of cognitive decline, his storytelling into senile ramblings. It was a meticulous character assassination, designed for one purpose: to give his children the legal power to strip him of his autonomy, to seize control of his empire, and to effectively make him a prisoner in his own life. They hadn't just been waiting for him to die. They had been trying to erase him, to bury him under the weight of their own greed while his heart was still beating. This revelation changed everything for Ilara. The pain of her husband's affair was a deep, personal wound. The anger at his financial crimes was a cold, hard fury. But this was different. This was a desecration. This was an attack on the memory of the one man in that family who had shown her true kindness, the man who had trusted her. This was no longer just about her own pain or her own revenge. This was about justice for Arthur. His final letter had asked her to be a general, to avenge him. Now, holding the proof of his children's ultimate betrayal, she finally understood the depth of that command. She stood before the corkboard, which was no longer a collection of clues, but a complete indictment. The affair, the embezzlement, the conspiracy against their father, it was all there. A horrifying, interconnected web of lies. Every photograph, every bank statement, every line of that fraudulent medical report was a nail. All she needed now was the hammer. The time for investigation, for hiding in the shadows, was over. The truth was a weapon, and hers was now fully loaded. With a calm, steady hand, Ilara Vance picked up the phone. It was time to call the second name on Arthur's list, the woman he had described as a shark who could smell blood in the water. It was time to hire a lawyer and plan the execution. The call to Evelyn Reed was like stepping into a different climate. If Mr. Abernathy was a calm, temperate harbor, Evelyn was a Category 5 hurricane contained within a sharp, designer suit. They met in Arthur's secret office, the war room, as Ilara had come to call it. Julian Croft was there, a silent, observant presence. Evelyn Reed did not waste time on condolences or pleasantries. She walked straight to the corkboard, her sharp, intelligent eyes scanning the web of deceit Ilara had meticulously assembled. She absorbed the entire, sordid picture in a matter of minutes: the affair, the embezzlement, the conspiracy. Her expression remained impassive, but a glint in her eye, like sunlight off the edge of a blade, betrayed her professional excitement. "Well," she said finally, turning to Ilara, her voice crisp and decisive. "Arthur was not exaggerating when he described you. This is one of the most comprehensive packages of pre-litigation evidence I have ever seen." She looked from Ilara to Julian with a nod of professional respect. "This isn't just a messy divorce, Mrs. Vance. This is wire fraud, corporate malfeasance, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse. Legally speaking, you don't have a smoking gun. You have a fully armed F-16. Evelyn then laid out the conventional path, the one any other lawyer would recommend. They would file the divorce papers under seal. They would initiate a lawsuit against Leo and Sophia for the stolen funds. They would quietly approach the district attorney's office with the evidence of their conspiracy against Arthur. It would be a long, brutal war fought in the hushed, carpeted hallways of courtrooms and in the sterile confines of deposition rooms. It would take years, and the Vance family's army of lawyers would fight them at every turn, burying them in motions and appeals. Leo and Sophia would be able to control the narrative, leaking curated stories to the press, painting Ilara as a vengeful, scorned wife. They might win, eventually, but the victory would be quiet, private, and deeply unsatisfying. Ilara listened patiently, her hands clasped on the desk. When Evelyn was finished, she gave a slow, deliberate shake of her head. "No," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with absolute authority. The two seasoned professionals in the room fell silent, recognizing the steel in her tone. "That's not how this is going to happen." A quiet legal battle is a war of attrition. That is their territory, not mine. They would drag it out until the truth is just a matter of opinion. That's not justice. It's just process. She stood up and walked to the corkboard, her fingers lightly tracing one of the red strings connecting Leo to the fraudulent medical report. They tried to murder my husband's father in the dark, she said, her voice dropping to an icy whisper. They tried to strip him of his mind and his dignity in secret. I will not give them the mercy of that same darkness. Their greatest asset, the thing they have valued above all else, family, love, decency, is their reputation, their name, their image in this city. That is the ground on which this battle will be fought. I am not going to win a case. I am going to obliterate a dynasty. And then she laid out her plan. It was audacious, theatrical, and utterly ruthless. The annual Vance Family Foundation Charity Gala was in 2 weeks. It was the crown jewel of the city's social calendar, an event where the wealthy and powerful gathered to publicly celebrate the Vance family's manufactured benevolence. It was the very stage upon which they performed their hypocrisy. And this year, Ilara, as the new head of the estate and the foundation, was its producer, director, and sole creative authority. We are going to give them the tribute they deserve, she declared, in front of everyone they have ever sought to impress. The plan was set into motion with the precision of a military operation. Ilara became the perfect embodiment of a double agent. In her calls with Leo, she was fragile and accommodating. She told him she had met with a lawyer who was helping her understand the transition. She even floated the idea of the gala herself, framing it as a necessary evil. Leo, I know it's soon, she'd said, her voice laced with false reluctance. But the board is insisting the gala go on. I think we should present a united front, for your father's memory, for the company, to show everyone that the family is stable. How? Leo, in his hubris, saw this as the final, logical step of her complete surrender. The idea of standing on stage with his meek, compliant wife, the benevolent heir accepting the adulation of the city just before he took back his fortune, was too delicious to resist. He agreed enthusiastically, blind to the fact that he was not walking into his victory lap, but onto a public scaffold. Behind the scenes, the war room buzzed with activity. Julian Croft and his team worked with a professional video editor, taking the mountain of raw evidence, the grainy surveillance photos, the cold financial data, the damning audio snippets from a source inside Dr. Finch's office, and weaving it into a narrative. They crafted a slick, professional, and utterly devastating 5-minute film set to somber classical music. It was to be presented as a memorial tribute to Arthur Vance. Evelyn Reed, meanwhile, prepared the legal blitzkrieg. She had the divorce papers drawn up, citing irrefutable adultery and financial fraud. She drafted the multi-million-dollar civil suit against both Leo and Sophia. She prepared cease and desist letters for the board members and injunctions to freeze all the illicit accounts the moment the film ended. Everything was prepared to be filed electronically with the push of a single button. Ilara was the grand conductor of this symphony of destruction. She personally oversaw the gala preparations, ensuring the technical setup was flawless, with a massive, high-definition screen as the stage's centerpiece. She curated the guest list with surgical precision, making sure every major business partner, every influential socialite, and every member of the Vance Industries board of directors was in attendance. She sent a special, anonymous invitation to Isabelle Laurent, a gilt-edged card inviting her to witness the public triumph of her generous benefactor. Ilara wrote and rewrote her own speech, timing every word, every pause. On the eve of the gala, she stood alone in the war room. The corkboard was now a completed battle plan. Every contingency had been considered. Every player was in position. She felt a profound and unsettling calm, the serene focus of a storm in the moments before it makes landfall. The stage was set. The actors, blissfully unaware, were preparing their costumes of lies and entitlement. The audience was gathering, eager for a night of champagne and polite applause, and the director, a woman they had all dismissed as a quiet, powerless pawn, was ready to raise the curtain on a tragedy of their own making, a performance that the Vance family and the entire city would never forget. The ballroom of the Grand Astoria Hotel was a galaxy of manufactured perfection. Crystal chandeliers rained down a soft, forgiving light upon the city's elite, the air humming with the gentle clinking of champagne flutes and the murmur of conversations that skated gracefully over the surface of things. It was a room suffocating in its own opulence, a grand stage for the annual performance of the Vance family's philanthropy. And tonight, the actors were playing their parts to perfection. Leo Vance, looking somber and handsome in a flawless tuxedo, moved through the crowd with the practiced grace of a young king, accepting condolences for his father's passing with a grave nod, his hand resting on Ilara's lower back in a public display of supportive husbandry. Sophia, a vision in emerald silk, drifted from one fawning group to another, a tragic princess bearing her grief with breathtaking fortitude. They were magnificent, and they were blissfully, fatally unaware that they were the lead performers in a tragedy. To them, Ilara was merely a prop. They treated her with a cloying, condescending kindness, a final assurance to their social circle that all was well within the House of Vance. They saw her quiet, black gown, her downcast eyes, her fragile demeanor, and they saw a woman already defeated, a problem that would soon be solved with the stroke of a pen. They did not see the architect of their ruin, standing calmly in their midst. Ilara moved through the glittering crowd like a shadow, her quiet thank yous and sad smiles a perfect camouflage for the cold, diamond, hard resolve in her heart. Across the room, she saw Isabelle Laurent, holding a glass of champagne, her laughter bright and confident. She looked beautiful, a triumphant guest at a party celebrating the dynasty she believed she was about to marry into. She had no idea she was a guest at her own immolation. After the dinner service, the lights dimmed slightly and a spotlight found the master of ceremonies on the stage. He spoke in warm, reverent tones about the legacy of Arthur Vance, his contributions to the city, and the strength of the family he had left behind. And now, he concluded, his voice resonating through the ballroom, to say a few words and to introduce a very special tribute to her late father-in-law, please welcome the new lady of the Vance family, Mrs. Ilara Vance. A polite, warm applause filled the room. Ilara felt Leo squeeze her hand, a final, patronizing gesture of encouragement. She walked toward the stage, each step measured and deliberate. The room fell into a respectful silence. All eyes were on the grieving widow, a figure of elegant sorrow. She reached the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the sea of faces. "Good evening," she began, her voice soft but clear, carrying to every corner of the room. "Thank you all for being here to honor a great man." She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "My father-in-law, Arthur Vance, was a man of immense strength and vision. He built an empire from nothing. But the lessons he taught me were not about business or finance. They were about character." She saw Leo and Sophia in the front row, their faces arranged in masks of solemn pride. They thought this speech was for them. Arthur believed that a person's true nature is not revealed in the light of their success, but in the darkness of their secrets. He believed that loyalty was not a matter of convenience, but a sacred vow. And he taught me that the most important inheritance a person can leave behind isn't money, or buildings, or a famous name. It is the truth. Her eyes swept the room, calm and unwavering. And tonight, in his honor, we are going to share his final truth with all of you. I present to you a tribute to the true legacy of Arthur Vance. She nodded to the technician, and the massive screen behind her flickered to life. It started innocently. A few classic black and white photos of a young, smiling Arthur. A picture of the first Vance Industries office. The somber, elegant strains of a piano concerto filled the ballroom. Leo and Sophia exchanged a small, self-satisfied smile. This was proceeding exactly as expected. Then, the music stuttered, warped into a low, ominous drone. The screen went black for a second before a new image appeared. A crystal-clear, long-lens photograph of Leo, his face alight with laughter, kissing Isabelle Laurent outside a restaurant. A collective, audible gasp swept through the ballroom like a sudden wind. Whispers erupted. Leo's face went from smug satisfaction to slack-jawed confusion, then to the blood-drained white of pure panic. Across the room, Isabel's champagne flute slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor. It was the opening salvo of a 5-minute-long public execution. The video was a relentless, clinical masterpiece of destruction. A montage of photographs followed Leo and Isabel entering the secret apartment, holding hands in Napa Valley. Then, the screen filled with financial data, a flowchart showing the money siphoning out of a Vance Industries subsidiary and into the shell corporation that paid for Isabel's life. Scanned copies of Leo's forged expense reports flashed on the screen, his signature magnified for all to see. The focus then shifted. A picture of Sophia appeared, smiling at a charity event. Then, the screen showed the bank statements, the undeniable proof of the stolen funds flowing directly into her private trust account. Sophia let out a small, strangled cry, her hand flying to her mouth. But the final act was the most devastating. The screen showed a photo of the unassuming Dr. Finch, and then an audio file began to play. The sound of Leo's voice, unmistakable and clear, filled the silent, horrified room. "The delusions are getting worse," his voice said, tinny and conspiratorial. "He's becoming erratic, a liability. We need the report to reflect his deteriorating state for the board." The audio ended, and the screen was filled with the fraudulent medical report. Key phrases were highlighted in blood red: severe cognitive decline, paranoid delusions, incapable of making sound financial decisions. The video ended. The screen went black. For 3 long seconds, the only sound in the grand ballroom was the hum of the air conditioning. It was a silence so absolute, so profound. It felt like the end of the world. Then, chaos erupted. The whispers became a roar of horrified murmuring. People were turning in their seats, staring at Leo and Sophia with expressions of disgust and disbelief. Business partners who had been shaking Leo's hand an hour earlier now looked at him as if he were a leper. The flashes of press cameras began to strobe like lightning in the dim room. Through it all, Alara stood at the podium, a pillar of calm in the hurricane she had created. Her expression was not one of triumph, but of somber, righteous finality. She leaned into the microphone one last time, her voice cutting through the rising tide of chaos like a shard of glass. "My father-in-law's final wish was for the truth to be known," she said, her voice commanding absolute attention. "As the sole heir to his estate and the new chairman of Vance Industries, my first official act is to honor that wish." She looked directly. The stage, her back straight, as security. Large men in dark suits, who had been pre-briefed by Julian Croft, converged on the front table. What followed was not the quiet, dignified exit of a disgraced couple. It was the chaotic, messy implosion of a world. The ballroom, a moment ago a bastion of decorum, descended into a cacophony of sound and motion. The initial stunned silence was shattered by the roar of 100 frantic conversations, the frantic clicking and flashing of cameras as the press, smelling the society story of the century, surged forward like a pack of wolves. Leo, jolted from his paralytic shock by the sight of the approaching security guards, finally broke. The mask of the charming heir disintegrated, revealing the snarling, entitled creature beneath. "Get your hands off me," he roared, his voice cracking with a mixture of fury and terror. "Do you know who I am? This is my event, my company." He turned his wild, desperate eyes to the crowd, searching for an ally, a friendly face, but found only a sea of horrified, disgusted, and morbidly fascinated strangers. "She's lying. It's all lies. The woman is a manipulative, lying whore." His accusations were a pathetic spray of venom against the tidal wave of his own ruin. He made a desperate lunge towards the stage, as if he could physically seize and undo the truth. But a guard stepped calmly in his path, an immovable wall of muscle and professional indifference. Sophia's collapse was a different spectacle. It was silent and absolute. Her entire existence, her sense of self, was built upon the foundation of her social standing, and that foundation had just been vaporized. The color drained from her face, leaving it a waxy, doll-like mask. Her eyes were wide, unseeing, fixed on some middle distance where her perfect life had just been murdered. She didn't scream or cry. She simply crumpled, a marionette whose strings had been cut and would have fallen to the floor in a heap of emerald silk if a guard had not caught her arm. holding her up like a tragic, broken doll. Their exit was a walk of shame that would be seared into the city's collective memory. The crowd parted for them, not with respect, but with the instinctive revulsion of a herd shunning its sick and wounded. The whispers followed them, sharp and cruel. The camera flashes were relentless, a brutal, strobing interrogation. They were no longer the prince and princess of the city. They were a public spectacle, their deepest shames laid bare for all to see. In the chaos, their mother, Beatrice, who had been holding court at a table of other society doyens, let out a single, piercing shriek as the reality of her children's depravity settled upon her, and she slumped forward in a dead faint, her pearls scattering across the table, the final, theatrical fall of the old Vance dynasty. Across the room, Isabelle Laurent was living her own private nightmare. The spotlight of public attention had swung from the Vances and was now hunting for her, the mysterious blonde woman from the photographs. She was the scarlet letter, the beautiful face of a sordid betrayal. People were pointing, whispering her name. With a choked sob, she turned and fled, pushing her way through the gawking crowd, her desperate, undignified escape, a stark contrast to her triumphant entrance. Her dreams of becoming the next Mrs. Vance had dissolved into a nightmare of becoming the city's most notorious homewrecker. Alara did not stay to watch the carnage. As security handled the removal of her soon-to-be ex-family, she slipped away backstage to a private suite that had been prepared as her command center. Evelyn Reed and Julian Croft were already there, their faces grim but focused. Evelyn was on her laptop, the glow illuminating her triumphant, shark-like smile. "It's done," she said, not looking up. "The divorce is filed. The civil suit is filed. The court has issued temporary injunctions freezing every account we identified. Financially, as of this moment, they are paralyzed." Julian was on his phone, coordinating the aftermath. Security has them in a holding room before escorting them off the premises. The press is a frenzy. The story is already the #1 headline on every major news site. Vance heirs implode in Gala of Leases. He looked at Alara, a deep, profound respect in his eyes. Arthur would have been proud. Just then, there was a quiet knock on the door. It was the chairman of the Vance Industries Board, a shrewd, silver-haired man named Marcus Thorne, accompanied by 2 other senior board members. They had been discreetly escorted away from the chaos. Their faces were pale with shock, but their eyes were clear, assessing the new landscape. They were businessmen, and they were witnessing a hostile takeover of the most epic proportions. Marcus looked at Alara, no longer as the quiet, unassuming wife of the heir, but as the sole, undisputed power in the room. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice heavy, "we had no idea." Alara met his gaze, her demeanor calm, her voice steady. She was no longer the grieving widow. She was the chairman. "I know you didn't, Marcus. What you saw tonight was a sickness that I have just surgically removed from this company. Leo and Sophia Vance will have no further role in this organization, effective immediately. My team is preparing a full internal audit to assess the financial damage. Tomorrow morning, I will be at the office at 8 a.m. to meet with the executive team. Our priority is to assure our employees and our shareholders of the stability and future integrity of Vance Industries. This company was my father-in-law's life's work. I will not allow his legacy to be tarnished by the greed of his children." Her authority was absolute, her vision clear. The board members, who had come in expecting to manage a hysterical woman or a chaotic power vacuum, found themselves in the presence of a formidable and decisive leader. They nodded, their expressions shifting from shock to a resolute new allegiance. The coup was complete. Hours later, the grand ballroom was a hollow, silent cavern, littered with abandoned champagne glasses and the ghosts of 1,000 ruined reputations. Alara was not there. She was back in Arthur's office, the war room. The battle was over. She walked to the corkboard, the monument to her secret campaign, and one by one, she began to take down the pins. The pictures of Leo and Isabel, the financial charts, the fraudulent medical report. The evidence was no longer needed. The judgment had been rendered. There was no feeling of elation, no thrill of victory. There was only the quiet, heavy finality of a war that had been won, and the profound, sobering weight of the silent, empty throne she now occupied. Straight, as security, large men in dark suits who had been pre-briefed by Julian Croft converged on the front table. What followed was not the quiet, dignified exit of a disgraced couple. It was the chaotic, messy implosion of a world. The ballroom, a moment ago a bastion of decorum, descended into a cacophony of sound and motion. The initial stunned silence was shattered by the roar of 100 frantic conversations, the frantic clicking and flashing of cameras as the press, smelling the society story of the century, surged forward like a pack of wolves. Leo, jolted from his paralytic shock by the sight of the approaching security guards, finally broke. The mask of the charming heir disintegrated, revealing the snarling, entitled creature beneath. "Get your hands off me," he roared, his voice cracking with a mixture of fury and terror. "Do you know who I am? This is my event? My company?" He turned his wild, desperate eyes to the crowd, searching for an ally, a friendly face, but found only a sea of horrified, disgusted, and morbidly fascinated strangers. "She's lying. It's all lies. The woman is a manipulative, lying whore." His accusations were a pathetic spray of venom against the tidal wave of his own ruin. He made a desperate lunge towards the stage, as if he could physically seize and undo the truth, but a guard stepped calmly in his path, an immovable wall of muscle and professional indifference. Sophia's collapse was a different spectacle. It was silent and absolute. Her entire existence, her sense of self, was built upon the foundation of her social standing, and that foundation had just been vaporized. The color drained from her face, leaving it a waxy, doll-like mask. Her eyes were wide, unseeing, fixed on some middle distance where her perfect life had just been murdered. She didn't scream or cry. She simply crumpled, a marionette whose strings had been cut, and would have fallen to the floor in a heap of emerald silk if a guard had not caught her arm, holding her up like a tragic, broken doll. Their exit was a walk of shame that would be seared into the city's collective memory. The crowd parted for them, not with respect, but with the instinctive revulsion of a herd shunning its sick and wounded. The whispers followed them, sharp and cruel. The camera flashes were relentless, a brutal, strobing interrogation. They were no longer the prince and princess of the city. They were a public spectacle, their deepest shames laid bare for all to see. In the chaos, their mother, Beatrice, who had been holding court at a table of other society doyens, let out a single, piercing shriek as the reality of her children's depravity settled upon her, and she slumped forward in a dead faint, her pearls scattering across the table the final, theatrical fall of the old Vance dynasty. Across the room, Isabelle Laurent was living her own private nightmare. The spotlight of public attention had swung from the Vances and was now hunting for her, the mysterious blonde woman from the photographs. She was the scarlet letter, the beautiful face of a sordid betrayal. People were pointing, whispering her name. With a choked sob, she turned and fled, pushing her way through the gawking crowd, her desperate, undignified escape a stark contrast to her triumphant entrance. Her dreams of becoming the next Mrs. Vance had dissolved into a nightmare of becoming the city's most notorious homewrecker. Alara did not stay to watch the carnage. As security handled the removal of her soon-to-be ex-family, she slipped away backstage to a private suite that had been prepared as her command center. Evelyn Reed and Julian Croft were already there, their faces grim but focused. Evelyn was on her laptop, the glow illuminating her triumphant, shark-like smile. "It's done," she said, not looking up. "The divorce is filed, the civil suit is filed. The court has issued temporary injunctions freezing every account we identified. Financially, as of this moment, they are paralyzed." Julian was on his phone, coordinating the aftermath. Security has them in a holding room before escorting them off the premises. The press is a frenzy. The story is already the #1 headline on every major news site. Vance heirs implode, in gala of lies. He looked at Ilara, a deep, profound respect in his eyes. Arthur would have been proud. Just then, there was a quiet knock on the door. It was the chairman of the Vance Industries board, a shrewd, silver-haired man named Marcus Thorne, accompanied by 2 other senior board members. They had been discreetly escorted away from the chaos. Their faces were pale with shock, but their eyes were clear, assessing the new landscape. They were businessmen, and they were witnessing a hostile takeover of the most epic proportions. Marcus looked at Alara, no longer as the quiet, unassuming wife of the heir, but as the sole, undisputed power in the room. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice heavy. "We had no idea." Alara met his gaze, her demeanor calm, her voice steady. She was no longer the grieving widow. She was the chairman. "I know you didn't, Marcus. What you saw tonight was a sickness that I have just surgically removed from this company. Leo and Sophia Vance will have no further role in this organization, effective immediately. My team is preparing a full internal audit to assess the financial damage. Tomorrow morning, I will be at the office at 8 a.m. to meet with the executive team. Our priority is to assure our employees and our shareholders of the stability and future integrity of Vance Industries. This company was my father-in-law's life's work. I will not allow his legacy to be tarnished by the greed of his children." Her authority was absolute, her vision clear. The board members, who had come in expecting to manage a hysterical woman or a chaotic power vacuum, found themselves in the presence of a formidable and decisive leader. They nodded, their expressions shifting from shock to a resolute new allegiance. The coup was complete. Hours later, the grand ballroom was a hollow, silent cavern, littered with abandoned champagne glasses and the ghosts of 1,000 ruined reputations. Alara was not there. She was back in Arthur's office, the war room. The battle was over. She walked to the corkboard, the monument to her secret campaign, and one by one, she began to take down the pins. The pictures of Leo and Isabel, the financial charts, the fraudulent medical report. The evidence was no longer needed. The judgment had been rendered. There was no feeling of elation, no thrill of victory. There was only the quiet, heavy finality of a war that had been won, and the profound, sobering weight of the silent, empty throne she now occupied. A year can be an eternity. In the 12 months that followed the infamous Vance Foundation Gala, the aftershocks of that night reshaped the entire landscape of the city's elite. The names Leo and Sophia Vance became cautionary tales, whispered synonyms for greed and hubris. After a swift and brutal divorce, Leo was left with nothing but a mountain of legal bills and a reputation so toxic he became a social pariah, his name erased from every guest list and board of directors. Sophia, broken and humiliated, retreated from public life entirely, selling her assets to fight the civil suits that bled her dry. Beatrice, their mother, lived out her days in the quiet, self-imposed exile of the family's summer home, a queen dethroned by the sins of her children. In their place, a new matriarch had risen. Alara Vance was no longer the quiet librarian or the shocking heiress. She was the formidable chairman of Vance Industries. She had proven to be as shrewd and visionary as Arthur, but with a compassion and integrity the company had long been missing. She had settled the lawsuits, purged the corporate culture of its corruption, and led the company to a new era of prosperity and respect. She was in every way the successor Arthur had believed her to be. One crisp autumn afternoon, Alara found herself in the one room of the grand Vance mansion she had left untouched, Arthur's private study. She had decided to sort through his personal belongings herself, a final, quiet act of respect for the man who had changed her life. Surrounded by his old books, his worn leather armchair, and the faint, lingering scent of his pipe tobacco, she felt a peaceful connection to his memory. While clearing out his large mahogany desk, her fingers brushed against a small, almost invisible switch on the underside. With a soft click, a false panel at the back of the bottom drawer receded, revealing a small, hidden compartment. Inside was a small, velvet-covered box. Her heart quickened. She lifted the box out. It was locked with a small, antique keyhole. She instantly recognized the key she would need. It was a small, ornate brass key that had been on Arthur's personal ring. A set Mr. Abernathy had given her after his passing. She had always assumed it was for some forgotten piece of luggage. She retrieved it from a safe in her room, and with a trembling hand, she inserted it into the lock. It turned smoothly. Inside the box was not another secret, but a lifetime of regret. There was a stack of yellowed letters, tied with a faded ribbon, and a single sepia-toned photograph of a beautiful young woman Alara had never seen before, holding a baby boy. She began to read the letters. They were from a young Arthur, written decades ago, long before he had met Beatrice. They were passionate, tender, and ultimately heartbreaking. They told the story of a forbidden love with a woman his powerful family deemed unsuitable. He wrote of his own weakness, of caving to his father's pressure and ending the relationship. The last few letters were filled with a desperate, soul-deep agony. He had discovered, too late, that his great love had been pregnant when he left. Her family had hidden the child from him, and he was forbidden from ever acknowledging his own son. He wrote of his regret as a constant, living presence in his life. The final letter was dated only 2 years prior. It was written in a shakier hand, but the words were clear. "I have kept track of him his entire life, from a distance," Arthur wrote. "A father in shadow. And I have never been more proud. He did not have my name or my money, but he inherited my true strength. He is a man of quiet integrity, a man who cannot be bought, a man with an almost preternatural gift for finding the truth where others see only lies. He became a private investigator, of all things, a seeker of secrets, my secret son, and of..." Ilara's breath caught in her chest, a cold, electric shock jolting through her. She read the final lines, her eyes scanning the page with a dawning, impossible realization. Arthur described his son, his physical bearing, his calm demeanor, his unwavering loyalty. Every single word, every precise detail, was a perfect, unmistakable portrait of one man, Julian Croft. In that moment, the entire, sprawling, brilliant scope of Arthur's final plan was revealed to her. It was a masterpiece of such profound, patient genius that it took her breath away. The inheritance was never just a reward for her loyalty. The revenge was never just a punishment for his children. They were all just intricate, necessary moves in a much grander game. Arthur, unable to name his illegitimate son as his heir without igniting a catastrophic legal war that would tarnish the boy's life, had conceived a different path. He had chosen Ilara, the one person he could trust with his entire world, and made her his queen. And then he had armed her, and for her most crucial weapon, he had given her his own son, the one man on earth genetically and spiritually predisposed to protect his father's true legacy. He had engineered a scenario where his forsaken son would be the instrument of justice, the protector of the empire he was born to inherit, all without ever knowing his true connection to it. Ilara was not just the general of Arthur's war. She was the bridge across a lifetime of regret, the conduit through which a father's love could finally reach his son. Ilara closed the box, a single, silent tear tracing a path down her cheek. It was a tear not of sadness, but of awe. She finally understood. Never underestimate the silence of a person who has endured too much. For in their quiet, they are not just surviving. They are observing, planning, and waiting for the precise moment to reclaim their power. Ilara had done just that, but she now knew she had been the instrument of a much quieter, much more patient, and much more powerful will than her own. True legacy, Arthur's final lesson taught her, is not written in bloodlines, but forged in character. And in his final, magnificent act, he had honored character above all else. The story of the Vance family, with its betrayals and its triumphs, has now been told. But it serves as a chilling reminder that the most savage wars are often fought not on battlefields, but across the polished surfaces of dining room tables. What happens when the person you swore to love for a lifetime becomes the architect of your greatest pain? Join us next time on Truyatengia.nh US for another story that proves that within the sacred walls of family, secrets can be the most dangerous inheritance of all.